Sequence Editor is an incredibly powerful work environment. Not only does it allow us to make edits on simple video files and photographs and incorporate music and sound effect, but it also allows us to incorporate blend files. Perhaps you've drawn all of your storyboards in a Blender file, which is a great way to complete this stage of our animation. As you know from this class, Blender has just a wonderful suite of tools that helps us animate and illustrate right in the application. It would be wonderful if we can incorporate those blend files directly into the sequence that we've crafted. Instead of rendering out all of our animations or rendering out images from the storyboards that we've created, can we just incorporate those master Blender files right here into the sequence? And the answer is yes. The only thing that we need to do differently in this time is to link a file. And this is new for us in this class. We're now going to be linking multiple Blender files into one master file itself. So think of this like a process of importing an existing blend file. And then to start this process, we're going to go into the File pull-down menu and choose Link. There's a difference between link and append. The link and append on the surface kind of seem like they're doing something very similar. In both cases, we're importing an existing Blender project file into the open project file. The big difference between them is that when we choose link, it's externally referencing the state of that Blender file. Any change that we make to that Blender file is going to be updated and reloaded in this Blender file, which makes it an incredibly attractive way of working. It almost makes it a live connection between the two. Let's go ahead and start it real fast. We're going to have to find the Blender file that we want to work with. I brought in some of the Blender files from animations that we've made earlier in the semester, and let's do the good old Arrow Lab. I like this one. Now, when we hit the link button, you're going to see a whole bunch of folders inside of your Blender file. These folders represents the data blocks that Blender hangs on to that kind of defines the information inside the project file, right? So what we're looking for are scenes, because we want to link scenes from one to another. Now, before I go any further, if I just look at it, it's already called scene, which isn't really maybe a great way of working. Now that we're going to be linking and appending all of these Blender files together to create a really strong network of files, maybe it'd be in our best interest to start returning to some of those previous project files and making some small changes to the scene names so that we can understand their role and their purpose inside the larger context of our animation. Let's do it real fast. I'm going to save this project file real fast. Save as. And let's do this. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to call this Dumbo Animatic. There we go. All right, so the Dumbo Animatic project file is going to be the project file that contains all of my storyboards. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to open up the Bone Arrow Lab. I'm opening now because I want to make some changes to this assignment. Remember this guy? This is from yesteryear. This is at the beginning of the semester. It's kind of a fun animation. And we're going to go in and we're going to change the name of our scene so that we can use this bow and arrow project file over in my Dumbo Animatic project file. This is going to be a live connection between these two different objects. So let's go ahead and do it real fast. We can easily do this in a couple of different locations. We can do it in our outliner, and that's probably the easiest. We can also do it in our properties tab down, or property panel down below. Let's do it in the outliner because it's a little bit more visual to understand how all this information is flowing together. Now, up until now, we've been working in a truncated view of all of the data containers inside of our Blender project file. This little pull-down menu here will show us a really great illustration of all of the data that's currently being saved and we're working with inside of Blender. And there's a lot, and we're not going to go into all of this stuff. The default is view layer. This is what we've been looking at the entire semester. And this is going to show us all of our grease pencil objects, all of the cameras and the lights that we've added in our scene. It's a great place to begin. However, if we look at the scenes, check it out. Now we're getting a different view of the objects and the data that's contained inside this Blender project file. at the top here, this is the master scene itself. And yes, you can have multiple scenes in one project file. More on that much, much later as we get towards the conclusion of our course. But for today, let's just simply rename our scene. This is the data container that's going to be linked over in my Dumbo animation project. Let's do it real fast. And we'll just call this bow and arrow. Voila. Now, in the context of our storyboards, it may be a good idea to have this be shot 1 or shot 2. Name it something that makes sense, something that you're going to be able to understand. All right, let's save our project file now. We've changed the scene name, and I'm going to return and open up once again my Dumbo animatic. Okay, so now with the bow and arrow scene changed in that project file, we're going to link it to my Dumbo animatic project file and incorporate that project as a strip, as a clip inside of my sequence. It's very cool. Let me show you what it looks like. Let's just do it real fast. We'll do File, Link. This is going to create that live reference between the different project files. I'm going to go into the bow and arrow that I just worked with. We'll choose link. It's going to show us all the data containers, and we want scene. And then there it is. There's the bow and arrow scene that we just changed a minute ago in this project file. Now, with that scene selected, we can choose link. Now, I know it seems kind of confusing at first because we've gone through this entire process of linking it, and then nothing really kind of changes here inside of Blender. It doesn't give you a really good, strong understanding that an external Blender file has been incorporated and linked into the system itself. Well, here's our confidence checker that something has, in fact, been linked in. If you go way up here to the upper right-hand corner, this little pull-down menu, this guy right here, is going to show us all of the available scenes inside of this project file, inside of this Blender file. And there's two. There's one called Scene, which is the scene that I'm currently working in that contains all of my my Dumbo stuff. And then check it out. There's one right below. This is Bow and Arrow. Now notice very carefully, it's showing us some really cool things here that, again, reinforces the idea that this is now a referenced, linked Blender file. We get a little chain link icon, and it's also showing us right here, it's getting cut off on the screen, but it's showing us right here which Blender file it's currently referencing. That's pretty cool. Now we're going to access that. We don't want to open it. If we wanted to, you certainly could just open it up. Now we're working inside of the video editing area, but if we go into the animation, haha, look at that. Now we're starting to see something, which is pretty cool. This isn't what we want in this particular moment. I'm going to return to my video editing workflow and open up my scene, because this scene here contains all of my animatic downstairs. And what we want to do is that we want to incorporate that linked bow and arrow scene file into this sequence. Let's do it real fast. It's super easy to do. We're going to go into the Add pull-down menu. And instead of adding a movie or a sound effect or an image, what we're now going to do is add a scene. This is the benefit, because now, check it out. It shows up just like any other clip inside of our sequence. We can put it wherever we want, maybe right there, for example. And when we play it, it's playing a live version of that animation. This is not a rendered animation coming from Blender. This is the actual raw data that exists in that other project file. That's pretty cool. In addition, any changes that we make to our bow and arrow project file are going to cascade and ripple into my Dumbo animatic. Let me show you here real fast. Let's make a pretty big sweeping change. I think I'm just going to go into my bow and arrow. Let's save Dumbo real fast. Just hit the save button. I'm going to open up my bow and arrow project file. There we go. And let's make a pretty big change. Let's make a sweeping change here real fast. I'm going to add another animation layer, and let's just put a circle on this thing. There we go. Let's go into draw mode. And let's just put, I don't know, a gigantic circle in here. Something like that. Just something easy to see. It doesn't really have to be animated. I just want you guys to see that this is going to now be extended across the entire animation, that this circle is going to be in there. Okay, let's go in. Let's look a little bit more carefully. I want to put this keyframe for my circle at the beginning so that it then can be seen throughout the duration, the entirety of my animation. Woo, there we go. Now, I need to save this revised bow and arrow project file. Just did it. Command S or Control S if you're on a PC. Let's once again return to Dumbo Animatic, and what do we see? Voila! There's our circle. and it's going to be there throughout the entirety of our animation. When we incorporate and link existing Blender scene files into this master Dumbo animatic, any changes that we make to the scene are automatically going to be applied to the edit here in our sequence, which makes this a live connection between these project files, which is very cool. If you look at this from the macro level, what we are establishing here, or what we can establish, is that each of our storyboards can then be turned into their own Blender project file. They can then be linked into a master project file. As we continue to refine those animations, it's already going to be placed and updated inside of our sequence. At the conclusion of our process, we don't have to compile all these together again like we have right now. We can just render our animation and we're up and running. It's a pretty neat workflow. It allows us to kind of have this organic, non-linear approach to both the creation and the refinement and the editing of all of our animations. So look to incorporate these scene files, your Blender scene files, into your animatic. That way you're already setting up the foundation for your final render. It makes it live. You're always going to have a project file, if you will, that you can come back to and see the totality of your work and how the work that you've just completed in one specific Blender file integrates wonderfully into the overall film.